Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up the DTS software first by doing our captures. And what we need to do is do both an incident and a reflective reading using the meter on the gray card. Now, before I started, I did custom white balance the camera because having a white balance can affect your exposure as well. And now we're ready to go. Now, this target has two different sides. It's got a gray card, which you see right here, and this is what we're going to use to meter off of. Then the other side are all the step wedges for the different gradations of gray. And you can see we're not doing this particularly high tech. I've literally got the thing up against the wall, and I'm kind of in full shade with the sun over there because I don't want the sun to be playing around with the readings. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to work on ISO 200, and I'm going to take a reading. I have found that if you stay in full f-stops as your starting point, it makes things a little easier in the software. So I've got my meter set at f8 as my starting point. So let's see where that gets us. So I'm going to take an incident reading off of the meter. And at 60th of a second, I have 8 2/10. So I need to write that down because the software is going to ask you not only the f-stop, but how many tenths. Now I'm going to turn the meter to spot reading, and I'm going to take a reading off of here. And at a 60th of a second, I have f8 1/10. So it's pretty close. Usually they're off a little more than that. This meter happens to be fairly well calibrated. So I just put 8 1/10 in here because those two different readings are going to allow the software not only to create a camera profile and load it into the meter, but it will also calibrate the meter while it's at it. So both the incident readings and the spot readings will then match. So now that we've got that part done, I simply turn over the target, and what we're going to do is use the reading from the incident reading, which in this case was 8 2/10 at a 60th of a second. So that's going to be our first shot. So I'm in full manual on the camera, and take my first shot. Now that's the middle reading. Now from there, what I need to do is I need to go up 3 stops and down 3 stops. So I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to mess with the f-stops. I'm just going to change the shutter speed. So I'm at a 60th of a second. I'm going to open up 3 stops by going to, so 60 to 30 is 1 stop, 30 to 15 is 2 stops, and then 15 to 8 is 3 stops. So I'm going to open it up by 3 stops, which is going to give me a highlight exposure. So I shoot at 1/8 of a second, and it should look kind of blown out on the back of the camera. That's where after, because having these blowouts, having the highlight clipping and the shadow clipping is what the software is going to use to calculate. So I've got my 3 stops open. Now I need to do 3 stops up. So from 60th of a second, 1 stop up is 1/25, 2 is 2/50, 3 is 1/500. So I dial in 1/500, take my shot, and I've got something that looks really dark. It's 3 stops underexposed. Again, the software is going to use that to calculate. So we're actually got all the data we need in order to load the images into the software. We know the difference between the incident and the spot reading, which we did by measuring off the gray part of the card. Flipped the card over, took a shot using the incident reading, which was f8 2/10, and then went up and down 3 stops. And that's as simple as it is. Now we're going to take that data and load it into the software, and that's what will allow us to create our profile for the camera. It's really that simple. First thing we want to do is connect the meter to the computer. So to do that first, we're going to take the USB cable and we're going to plug it into the computer. Then we're going to take the meter itself and we're going to open up the little door on the side of the meter to expose the USB port. We'll then take the small end of the USB cable and plug that into that port. And you can see the meter was turned off during this process. Now it's ready to be turned on. And when we turn it on, you'll see a little flashing USB icon on the front of the screen, which means it's ready to go. Now we're ready to start the software. Alright, now that we've got our shots taken, now it's time to go into the DTS software and create a custom profile for our camera. So we're going to click on Create New Profile, and we're going to use the quick mode. We're just going to do a single ISO profile for our camera. And we shot the target 2, which is my favorite because it only requires the 3 shots. Now remember, we had those numbers that we recorded when we did the incident and the reflective reading. We were at ISO 200. We chose our shutter speed at 60. And if you remember, the aperture settings were 8 2/10 for our incident reading and 8 1/10 for our reflective or spot reading. So we need to put that in because that's part of the system that's going to calibrate the meter itself as well. Then we go ahead and open up the shots. I've got my 3 JPEGs of the target that I shot here. And I click on one and it brings it up full screen. And you can shoot, well, I only had the 3 targets here, so you can click them and you see they show green. Those are the 3 targets we're going to use. Click on one, shows us full screen, and then we get crosshairs. We need to tell it where exactly is the target. So we just drag each of these markers to their respective corners, and this will allow the software to precisely find out where on the target all of the gradations are. Now once we've got one done, since we were shooting on a tripod, the target never moved, we can simply click on the remaining shots and it will automatically place each of the crosshairs in the right spot on the target. Now we can go ahead and generate our profile. The software will then calculate the profile based on what it sees from the different exposures and present us with a graph that shows us the entire range of our camera. And here we see it. And we can see that from the top to the bottom, actually, we've got quite a bit of range. We've got down about 4 stops, and we've got up about 3 stops. So that's a pretty good range. Now there are green clipping points there. You can see those green lines. Those are the clipping points. You can go in and adjust those later as well, because I find them a little too conservative. But I'm just going to start out by giving the profile a name. This was a 5D Mark II with a f8 lens, or 2.8 lens on it. Click on OK, and then that shows up in our list. Now we can go back into Edit Profile, because I do find that the default clipping points are a little bit too conservative. So I'm going to bring back the one we just made, and you do need to tell it what ISO was. And I can adjust the green clipping points. I like to come within 2 or 3/10 of a stop of the actual range of the sensor, because I don't want to get warnings when I'm really safe. And then I'll overwrite that and make those clipping points active, and that will actually transfer into the meter. So now I can select any of the profiles I've created. I can put as many as 3 into the meter at any one time. And I just have my meter connected with the USB port. Click on Transfer to Meter, and if there are any in there already, we'll overwrite them. And when this is done, I will have put these 2 new profiles into my meter, which are then ready for accessing. And then our next step will be to put this to work, and that will be in future session. Also, do take notice that I was working on Mac OS 10.6.8. So this is Snow Leopard, and the software now works beautifully there. Now, after quitting the software, we want to first power off the Sekonic meter, and you'll see the DTS software screen disappear when we do this. Then you can disconnect the USB cable from the meter itself, and then disconnect the other end from the computer. Now the exposure profiles are loaded and ready to go.